I'm Graham and I hope everyone's having a great day. Welcome to this video, which is a pilot for a new series I'm hoping to produce for new users to the Canon EOS M50 camera. Now, I've had this camera since its launch about 18 months ago. I've already owned the M1, the M3, and I currently own the M5 as well. So when the M50 was released, with the option of this now fold out articulated touchscreen, and the fact that it could shoot 4K video meant that it was a no-brainer for me. I just had to have the camera. Having bought it, I'm absolutely pleased with the results that are coming from it in both terms of video and in stills. Now, there are a lot of critics for the crop that this gives you, as well as a lot of the other Canon cameras, over the extra 1.5 times crop or 1.56 times crop that's added when you shoot it in 4K video mode. So that means something like a 24mm native lens becomes a 39mm lens once you start to apply the image shake reduction. So one man's meat is another man's poison, so if you're a landscape shooter, that loss of field of view is a problem, but if you're a wildlife shooter, that extra 1.56 times crop can mean all the difference between getting a good video image and none at all. So it's horses for courses, as they say. Anyway, this camera has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, and that's made up of 6000 by 4000 pixels in a 3:2 aspect ratio, so it fits the old 35mm format film aspect ratio. Now, the camera has what's called dual pixel autofocus, so half of the pixels are used in light gathering and the other half of the pixel is used in part of the autofocus determination. Now, the autofocus is built up in a number of areas. Now, it depends on the lens you've got connected to the camera as to which areas it supports. Something like this kit lens, the 18-55, only supports a 99 area autofocus method. If you switch to other lenses like the 18-150 or the 55-200, this opens up the AF points to 143, and in fact, if you use the EOS adapter, which converts your EF or EFS lenses back to EOS M, then again you'll be using 143 AF points, so substantially outnumbered the number of points that you can use for autofocus. Now, it's phase detect autofocus, so that means the camera will actually drive to the focus point and it will stay locked on. When you're shooting 4K video, unfortunately, it doesn't use that dual pixel autofocus system, it uses contrast detection. So that means the camera has to hunt for that particular focus point. So it drives to the point, slightly above it, and then it brings it back to get the actual focus point. So you see a little bit of hunting in the autofocus mode in 4K, but shooting 1080p, you're using the phase detect and you get superb lock-on focus every time. In terms of shooting video, this camera will shoot 1080p at 24, 25, 30, 50 and 60 frames, so you've got a whole range of frames there to suit PAL or NTSC formats, or you can use those to slow down your footage for slightly slow motion effects. If you shoot 4K, then you're limited to 24 or 25 frames per second with this camera. If you go to the 720p mode, then you can go up to the higher frame rates of 120 frames per second, but obviously there's no autofocus and there's no sound with it, but it's nice if you want to use something like a 4 times reduction for slow-mo. Now, the camera does have a silent mode of operation. Now, unlike some mirrorless systems, it's not enabled by a button or a menu setting. It's actually enabled through the scene mode on the top of the camera. So you turn the mode down to scene and then select silent operation. Now, unlike some mirrorless cameras, it doesn't give you an increase in the maximum shutter speed, so it's still a fully automatic operation, almost like a P mode. It doesn't give you burst mode, it doesn't give you continuous autofocus when you're shooting, so it is limited in what it can do. But in those situations where a mechanical shutter is undesirable, such as a museum or a wedding or a church, then you can use this silent mode and it will give you the electronic shutter and a very silent operation. But do be warned that the electronic shutter does suffer from a very slow readout, so if there's any subject movement in your frame, you could end up with some tilted diagonals as the subject moves across the frame because of this slow readout from bottom to top of frame. So with electronic shutter, be aware that unless you've got a static subject, you could see some jaggies or rolling shutter effects. Now, the screen on this particular camera is 1.04 megapixels, so it's a touchscreen and 3:2 aspect ratio, so it mimics the actual sensor itself. Touchscreen operated, so all the menu functions are available through the touchscreen. In fact, that is really the only way you can access some of the menu functions. On the camera, there's only one programmable hard button, which is the MFN, but in the shooting mode, you can actually program the trash can as another fixed button. As the trash can isn't used during shooting, you can actually assign a program feature to that trash can icon, so you've effectively got two buttons that you could assign to a shooting operation. So maybe you want to have the ISO on your top button and the AF modes on the back button. Say there are so many options that you can program onto those three buttons. That is really up to you how you deploy that. Now, with the menuing system on this camera, if you're new to Canon, then the guided mode is probably the one you want to use, but it does mean there are some extra buttons to press when you want to change menus, or you're changing from A mode to TV mode. You'll find that you've got to press a few more buttons to get into the options. But if you're a previous Canon user, use the standard menu and you'll be familiar with all the layout that the Canon usually uses with its camera. So, for example, I've always used Canon cameras, so I dismissed the guided mode just to gimmick it to me. I've gone straight into the standard menu mode and I've learned my way around those menus and what to set. In addition to that, there's what is called My Menu tabs, so you can actually set up your useful features in your own custom tabs. So if you only want things like the autofocus method, the aspect ratio, video size, you can program those into your own tabs, name them to whatever you want, and then you can have a reduced set of instructions available over 3 tabs. You're not looking through all those 6 pages of setup menus to find the one that you want. You've got it directly where you want in your own particular setup. So that's a basic introduction to the camera. The current lineup for lenses for the camera is quite restricted. At the moment there are only 7 lenses in the EOS M range, but using the EF or EFS to EOS M adapter, you can use all your existing EF or EFS lenses or any third-party lens which has the Canon EF or EFS lens flange. It does mean that you can use an extended range of lenses. Something like my 50mm f1.4 is fantastic for low light photography. You've got that nice bright 1.4 aperture, which is always a bonus when you want to shoot in low light. In addition to the standard adapter, there are several adapters on their market now which are copies of the Metabone speed booster. In fact, I've got a Viltrox in my bag which is a 0.7 times speed reduction, so it does mean that you're getting the concentration of a full frame lens concentrated down to the APS-C size sensor, so you're effectively getting a 1 f-stop increase in light levels on the sensor. So that's why it's called a speed booster. It also maintains the actual focal length of your lens. So if you put in a 70-200 lens on the camera, it is in fact a 70-200, and you're not using the 1.7 times crop that you would normally do if you're applying a full frame lens to the crop frame body. So the speed booster has 2 benefits which you might want to consider, and I'll be touching on those in a later video. So let's see what this camera can do. I've shot some stills and some video today with the camera just to give you an idea of what's available from the camera in terms of image quality and video quality, and in the next video we'll be looking at how to set up some of the menus, my menu for example, to give you the best settings to use when you're out and about. Remember, exposure depends on just 3 elements: aperture, which governs the amount of light reaching the sensor and it controls the amount of depth of field; the shutter speed, or the TV mode in the Canon series of cameras, determines the amount of time that light falls on the sensor, and it's responsible for arresting or creating subject motion blur. So for example, in this picture of the waterfall with a very fast shutter speed, you can actually see the droplets in the air that the camera has captured. Change that shutter speed to a longer shutter speed and you can see streaks of those droplets where the camera has actually created this smooth effect. So shutter speed can be used very creatively, as we'll see again in later videos where we're looking at capturing fireworks or star trails or light painting, so we can use the shutter to be very creative. Now the ISO I normally dismiss because I like to keep the camera set down to its lowest or native ISO. So in this case we're talking about ISO 100. Once it's down there, we've got the maximum dynamic range, so that's the range of tones that the camera will capture, and it gives us the lowest noise in our image, so we're getting the best possible imaging from that sensor. Now this camera does support RAW as well, and it also supports a mode called Compressor RAW. In using Compressor RAW, the file size is reduced by about 25%, so if you're limited by memory card size for the number of pictures that you want to shoot on that occasion, then you can use the Compressor RAW. Obviously you'll need to have a program that will decompress that, either the supplied software from Canon, the Canon Professional, or one of the later Lightroom or Photoshop Elements or Photoshop CC, to enable you to decompress the CR3 file that the camera is generating. So that's it for this introductory video to the Canon EOS M50. We'll be developing more as this series progresses. If you have any ideas or any features that you want covered, please put them in the comments below and I will respond to them all. If you are a new viewer to this and you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do click that subscribe button and click the bell notification icon, and then you'll be notified when I upload subsequent videos in this series. Also, if you've not seen my photographic blog, again I'll put a link to that in the video description below. You'll find lots more information on photography, on Micro Four Thirds systems, the Canon systems, and on Panasonic Lumix bridge camera, so please do check that out. And incidentally, on the home page you'll find the application to join my news group. So this is a newsletter that goes out to just over 2,800 people every 3 weeks now, and it's not only a newsletter, it's also a technical publication, stuff that I don't normally publish on the blog. It's a way of saying thank you for your subscription, and you'll get lots more technical information from me via that newsletter. So check it out if you've not already seen it. Just subscribe, complete the application form, which gives me the authority to give you emails. So that's it for the video. Enjoy the pictures and video that I've taken, and what I want to show you is the speed booster with a 50mm f1.4 lens and a very shallow depth of field you can get by using that particular lens. So let me set that up and shoot some stills and video with it, and you can see the effects you can get with these speed boosters and using full frame lenses on this crop frame sensor body. So until the next video, thanks very much for watching, please do take care, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now. So this is the Canon EF 50mm f1.4 with the Viltrox EF M2 adapter. Now the lens is currently set to an aperture of f2.0. My exposure is 1/320th of a second at ISO 100. So you can see the amount of depth of field that's available with this lens now. The background is nicely out of focus, so you can see this is a great lens for portraiture outside in video mode. So this is a 50mm f1.4 at f2.0. So I'm going to change the lens all the way down to f1 because with that extra 0.7 times magnification we're reducing that full frame circle down to the 1.7, so we get that extra stock of light. So I'm going to change this down to effectively what is f1.0, and we can see the amount of depth of field that's created by doing so. Now the camera is showing me an aperture of f1.0. The lens itself is an f1.4 lens, but it's calculated to be f1.0 because of the circle of light that's normally projected onto a full frame sensor is concentrated down to cover the 1.7 times crop of the APS-C sensor. So we're getting that extra concentration of light, which gives us that extra stops worth of light. So that's why we're ending up with the f1.0 aperture. So you can see we've got a much shallower depth of field compared to the f2.0 that I showed you in the previous example. I'll now switch the lens up to a smaller aperture. I'll select f8, and you can see that the background becomes less blurred. We get a much sharper background by using that smaller aperture. So I've now changed the lens to an aperture of f8, but because of the lighting situation, we're nearly approaching dusk here in the woods, and I've had to drop my shutter speed to 1/60th of a second, but to get the exposure I've used the ISO, and I boosted that to ISO 250 to get somewhere in the same exposure. So you can see now my background is much sharper than we were shooting with f2.0 or the maximum of f1.0 calculated. Now, a typical use of this M50 camera is for video logging, and I've got the camera set up in a typical vlogging mode. So I've got the 11 to 22mm lens, I'm shooting in 1080p. I've got the enhanced image stabilization turned on, so that reduces a lot more of the handshake that you sometimes get when you're holding these cameras. For the audio, I'm using the Rode Video Micro mounted into the hot shoe of the camera. So this is a typical video logging setup, and you'll find that most people are doing walkabouts and talk to camera using this sort of rig. The little bit of handshake you get is probably going unnoticed, but with a gimbal you can actually get that reduced to zero. But for a handheld, this enhanced electronic image stabilization is probably good enough for most video logging applications.